as someone who's got a decade of being delusional, having a delusional disorder, I've come to understand the mechanisms that underpin such experiences very well. So in this video, I'm going to talk about how they arise and what they are. What are delusions? In the Oxford Dictionary, I believe that the definition is something like a concretized belief of which goes unchallenged even in the face of contradictory evidence. I'd like to change that a bit because that's kind of misleading to how delusions actually happen. I would like to say that anything not attached to reality or sourced from reality that happens almost independently in the mind is delusional. Think, for example, if I was to drop something 100 times and it keeps hitting the ground, but I decided in my mind that the only reason that was happening is because it was magically being pulled to the ground by something that I couldn't see that was that just sounds like gravity. Imagine that when this was being dropped to the ground, I would say that's not actually happening. That can't be happening. That's just an illusion. It's like, well, I'm avoiding something directly happening in reality and then making up something else in my mind, which is rejecting that reality right in front of me. The best way to think of a delusion is in the definition of truth being something which is observed, something which is seen, something that happens, a fact. The delusion is in the opposition of that. So even when something is seen, for some reason, the brain disbelieves or goes off into different thinking, or in the absence of truth or the absence of something seen, the brain builds up certainties or ideas about what fills in that gap. So now that we've got the definition, really you need to understand why these sorts of experiences arise in the first place. And generally what I've noticed is that a nervous system which is low in trust, right? Because our nervous system, independent of our logical thinking brain, actually keeps a lot of sensory data about the world. And for a lot of people, when they go through war zones, bad childhood experiences, or even tough jobs or living situations in their lifetime, when they go back into situations that remind them or have some lasting effect on them from those past experiences in the current experience, their nervous system is quite distrustful of it. So it's going to look for threats effectively, or it's going to look for things in that environment where it can justify the way it feels. And so a nervous system which is distrusting of the world will look for reasons to distrust the world as a form of pattern recognition. The next is strong emotional experiences. So emotions are kind of built into you. They're hardware, right? If you look at the emotional wheel, we have a lot of emotions, and those come from biological interactions in those lower parts of the brain, not necessarily something in that logical part that we all try to identify with, but something more that just happens as a response to our surroundings. Now, the thing is that I'll go into this at another time, but there's two real ways to react to emotional experiences, and that is to explain that you're experiencing an emotion and why. Say you're feeling anger because someone hit you. Ow, you've just hit me, now I feel really angry and it's making me feel like I want to hit you. That's communicating an emotion. But the next way of reaction that a lot of people have as well is allowing the emotion to possess you. So someone hits you and then you go, you're an idiot because you've done all this terrible stuff and now you've done that and this is why I hate you. And the emotion speaks for you. And when emotions speak for you, they don't act intelligently. It's almost like being possessed. I think in the ancient Egyptian era, there used to be the god of anger and the god of love. And the reason for that being is that emotions possess you. They kind of try to speak for you. And the problem is when you're not thinking logically or rationally, it's very easy to get what I call emotionally driven ignorance, which is where your emotional experiences take over and they don't see what's happening in reality. They see what's useful to them. Another way that delusions can rise is through regional brain weakness. So this front part of the brain here, the prefrontal cortex, is vital for regulating your emotions and not falling prey to what I've just spoken about. But some people from birth have genetically inherited weaker parts of this brain, maybe lower brain volume size or lower cortical thickness, and for whatever reason, when they're going through everyday life, their emotions can possess them because they have parts of the brain, or through drug addiction, abuse, or damage over time, or maybe just not using that part of the brain through solving puzzles and playing video games or doing anything that increases that planning part of the brain. This this can then be too weak to settle those emotional systems down that give rise to delusion for whatever reason. So once conditions are right, and you've got either any of the three things that I've previously mentioned, or all three, the delusions start to grow with words, right? Or thoughts, or images, or even feelings. And so when you're navigating the world around you, it's best to do so in a calm and collected way, because otherwise you fall prey to those previous things I've spoken about. But once a delusion sets in, it might just start off as a thought. So imagine that I'm in a pitch black room, right? And I decide it's too dark, I'm going to light it up. I then decide to light it up with a candle, and it eliminates most of the darkness. But then in the corner of the room, there's a bit of darkness there. And when I was a child, something like a fox jumped out of the darkness once, so my nervous system is set up and looking for something in that darkness already, but maybe I forgot the experience, maybe I don't remember I've had that. So I might start to think to myself, I don't have any more candles. What could be in the dark? It could be something terrible. And then you start to continually think and think and think until that emotional experience, that distrust, or maybe that unnerviness, that kind of feeling of unsettlement kind of rises until it creates loads and loads and loads of thought, which leads on to crystallized intelligence. Now, crystallized intelligence is knowledge. It's things you have cemented in the brain and then learned to take as fact, right? Now, this can happen through studying a book, but it can also happen through self-rationalization, delusional thinking. And this is where things become fixed beliefs, which is why I think that just calling something that's a fixed belief a delusion is inaccurate, because so many delusional steps happen till it becomes a concrete delusion. Crystallized intelligence is often different, well, it is different from fluid intelligence, because you have two. And your crystallized intelligence happens a lot when you're older and you kind of cement your understanding of the world. But the problem is, if you've given in to all those faulty mechanisms that I'm talking about, many people do because they don't realize, and I know I did when I was younger, you build a lot of thought networks in the brain which are alive. Neurons and ideas in our brains are alive, right? They're neurons, living tissue that connected through neuroplasticity to other parts of the brain. And so these things compete with each other, and they want to grow into fully formed belief systems and be taken as truth. And so when someone spent years maybe developing what could be in that dark, shadowy patch in the corner of an unlit room, those things start to become more and more real in the brain until it takes over, until it's something where you go, well, yep, that's just the truth. Maybe 2 years have gone, I've been in a different house now and there's no dark patch. I'll go, no, there was definitely something in there, because you've almost convinced yourself, which means because the brain can't differentiate between reality and what's not reality within the mind, it takes imagination as real. And so all of the experiences now have become real, and that just solidifies that crystallized intelligence in the brain. Hopefully that wasn't too weird of an explanation, because obviously the way that I've learned everything is going through this experience and reading and listening to good authors and scientists to understand it better, but also feeling my way through it at the same time. So I have a very strange understanding, if you like. One of the consequences to delusions, though, is that because you've not built your mental architecture up in a way of which relates to reality, your behaviors, your words, your actions might be slightly out of accordance with reality. And so if you've got 100 people who have based themselves as scientists and they all know exactly how the world works, maybe it's a perfect world and they've figured out the secrets of the universe and they all understand everything, right? Then you've got you, or one person, me, anyone, just one person goes into that group of 100 people and tries to interact with them. There's almost going to be this disconnect, because the way of which the brain is going to try to synchronize with other people's brains, it's just not going to work. You're going to say the wrong things, you're going to do the wrong things, you're going to be paranoid, you're going to have emotional differences. This sort of stuff is where the delusional thinking really gets in the way of life. For example, if I've had really negative experiences with people and have no reason to believe that about a current group of people, if I go through with those emotional experiences, it then makes me act out in a discord to the people I'm around, which they won't know, you see. And so that then creates friction, and friction creates problems. And then all of the previous things I've talked about, as the emotions that you go through spiral and delusions tighten their grip through thinking and building them in improper ways, that then further alienates you and isolates you because you're unable to match other people's sense of reality. Delusions are so unique. That's why they're so hard to treat. It's really best just to prevent them forming than it is to try and manage them once they've formed. That's what I've learned anyhow. And that brings me on to my final topic, how to prevent delusions. Well, it's very difficult, but one of the best mantras that you can ever have is to learn the ability to say, I don't know, and to calm down your nervous system in those situations. So say, for example, I'm in that candlelit room and there's a dark patch in the corner and it's really making me nervous. Have to be able to say, well, I don't actually know what's in that darkness, right? I don't know, I can't see, I can't perceive what's in there, but I'm going to sit with this not knowing, and maybe after 8 hours it will show me there's nothing there. Maybe nothing will happen. And so the nervous system will learn to calm itself down. When you think of a scared animal, you pull a dog that's lived off on the street for a while into your home, it's shivering in the corner, isn't it? Right? That's how you've got to imagine your nervous system, is that it will get a bit all over the place, even if it's in the safest environment because of past experiences, worries, concerns, but you can't allow that to bubble up into thoughts. And so you have to be able to be comfortable with not knowing. And one of the best ways to do that really is by learning a discipline like Zen Buddhism, which brings the mindfulness back to the self, and then allow emotions to pass. And again, communicate your emotions. Don't allow your emotions to explain themselves. If you're feeling angry, I'm feeling angry because of this, or I don't know why I'm feeling angry, but I'm not going to talk in that anger. I'm just going to wait for the anger to pass. If you can sit with that emotion for 90 seconds and not verbalize it, not add fuel to the fire, then it can often settle itself. I believe there's a TED talk on that somewhere. I might try and link it in the description. Also, understanding what logic is. Lots of people use logic, but they don't really understand what logic means because it's kind of one of those terms that was designed by the Greeks, Latins, whatever, and logic doesn't really mean the etymology doesn't really express what it means. Logic is simply using a set of true assumptions or observations to gauge a true outcome. And so you have to be honest with yourself. Do I know this thing with all certainty? If not, then I can't use true assumptions to arrive at any conclusion. If you use incorrect assumptions, you will arrive at an inconclusive conclusion, an incorrect conclusion. And so it's really important to have the self-discipline to know to calm your nervous system down, not allow emotions to possess you. And then thirdly, when you're calm, when you're stable, take whatever it was that was causing the delusional experience or the trigger or even the delusion itself and try to go through it with as much logic as possible. Why can't it be the case? Why is it very unlikely it's the case? Even if it was the case, how would I react? What would I do? All these sorts of, and this is where having someone like a psychoanalyst would come in really handy, and talking through with them where they can guide you through that kind of self-scrutiny, which can otherwise be quite difficult, especially if you're susceptible to delusional thinking in the first place. Anyway, that was my unscripted video today. I'm trying to do a mix of script and unscripted, so I'm sorry if that was a mess, but have a great day.